Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
After 8 years, it's clear this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost. And it's not just grocery prices that have skyrocketed in the last year. It's Jamaican vacations too, Mr. Speaker. The tab for the Prime Minister's trip this year came in at over $230,000, an increase of 42%. And of course, while Canadians have to pay higher prices themselves, he gets to pass his bill on to taxpayers. And now they have to pay the bill for his high carbon hypocrisy and the 23% tax hike that is coming. He's refused to cancel the hike. Will he at least let Canadians decide for themselves and call a carbon tax election?
Before we continue, just for the very top end of question period, I'm going to ask the member from Timmins James Bay to please keep his comments to himself until the moment that he has the mic at the floor. The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Conservative Party has become the CIO of Canada, the Chief Inaction Officer, Mr. Speaker. What he's advocating on this side of the House is inaction on climate change. It's inaction on clean growth. It's inaction on green jobs, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House and millions of Canadians, we believe in action. Action against climate change. Actions to build the economy of tomorrow. Actions to build the jobs of tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. We're going to fight climate change and make sure that we bring more money in the pocket of Canadians. That's our plan.
Again, I'm going to ask members to be very careful about ascribing acronyms or names to other honourable members. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Action they've taken is forcing Canadians to food banks for the first time in their lives. It's forcing Canadians to turn down thermostats and put food back on the shelf because they can't afford it. Meanwhile, their environment plan has been revealed to just be a tax plan because they've fallen 4 spots in the climate change ranking after raising the carbon tax, and their own environment commissioner has said they've stacked failure on top of failure. But they have succeeded in driving up prices. Will they do the right thing and let Canadians decide for themselves and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our carbon rebate puts more money in the hands of 8 out of 10 Canadians. And just this morning, Mr. Speaker, I had a call from Keith in my riding. He's retired and he's been keeping track of all his invoices since January the 1st. And he was delighted to tell me that even with adding a little extra because he might have known the impact on this morning orange, that he is ahead $68 every single climate action rebate check. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
That is just false. Their own budget watchdog, the parliamentary budget officer that they appointed, testified at committee and said the following. Once you factor in the rebate, but also the economic impacts, the majority of households will see a negative impact as a result of the carbon tax. In Newfoundland, hardworking middle-income families will be $377 poorer after the carbon tax and the rebate is factored in. So, will they show the courage and put their plan to quadruple the tax in front of Canadians, and Canadians can have the choice between that and our plan to axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I love to get up to talk about my province of Newfoundland and Labrador and how the carbon rebate is putting more money back into the pockets. With the rural top-up, Mr. Speaker, in April 15th, the average family of 4 in my riding all throughout Newfoundland and Labrador outside of St. John's will be getting $1,430 a year to offset prices. And, Mr. Speaker, we've got another benefit. Another lady in my riding, Katie, applied for the oil to heat pump program, which is going to save her $800 a year as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the support he receives from the Bloc Québécois. How can the Bloc Québécois support a Prime Minister who has doubled our national debt? How can the Bloc Québécois support a Prime Minister who has doubled the cost of housing for Quebecers? How can the Bloc Québécois support a Prime Minister who has forced hundreds of thousands of Quebecers to food banks? My question to the Prime Minister, what did he promise to the Bloc to save his career and his government? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, for the thousands of Canadians who are watching us today on TV, it's clear. You hear the party of inaction on the other side, Mr. Speaker. Their strategy is inaction to counter climate change, inaction against economic growth, inaction in order to create jobs. On this side of the House, we believe that people believe in action, action against climate change, action to create the jobs of tomorrow, and they want economic growth, and that's what we believe, and that's what Canadians believe, and that's what we will do for our country, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member from Mégantic-L'Érable. The millions of Quebecers who are watching us would have liked to have heard an answer to my question. The question Bloc MPs need to ask themselves today is this: will they set aside their ideological bickering for once and vote for the Quebecers they allegedly represent and who are fed up with this Prime Minister's arrogance, a Prime Minister who has broken our immigration system, who has increased taxes, who allows dangerous criminals to serve their prison sentences at home? A Prime Minister who interferes in every single area of Quebec's jurisdiction. So I'll ask my question again. What did the Prime Minister promise the Bloc to save his career and his government? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my honourable colleague that during the last election campaign, the Conservative Party of Canada promised Canadians that they would implement a carbon tax. They promised that they would implement a price on pollution system. Not only that, through you, Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the honourable member that he just has to look behind him, who was a minister in the Quebec government who actually adopted such a measure and who fought against climate change. Just ask her what she thinks about it. The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we're barely a third of the way through the session, and already the Liberals are breaking records and refusing Quebec's legitimate demands. No to the right to opt out of drug insurance, no to the right to opt out of dental care, no to advanced requests for medical assistance in dying, no to full powers in immigration, no to the $1 billion refund for asylum seekers, no to Bill 21. It's like a competition. They're seeing how often they can say no. But they're going to take a plunge when the time comes to claim their prize. Do they realise that Quebecers aren't going to let themselves be disrespected like this? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, we've said yes for childcare, yes for a healthcare agreement, yes for dental care, yes for seniors, yes for youth. Mr. Speaker, we've said yes. They need to learn what yes means. They want yeses. But they've become the best partisans of no. No to collaboration, no to discussion, no to a good agreement. They don't like us to work well with Quebec, because when things are good for Quebecers, things are bad for the Bloc Québécois. The honourable member for La Prairie. All their no's add up to a list that's already so long that you could unroll it all the way to the North Shore. Let's continue. No to the transfer of infrastructure and housing budgets. No to the repatriation of culture. No to the single tax return system. No to the abolition of the monarchy. No, 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 Mr. Speaker. It's reminiscent of Gilles Vigneault, who sang, and listen to this: when a strong wind picks up, you better buckle up. Maybe they don't realize it. Do they not realize that by being told no, Quebecers will soon be saying oui? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, our we and yes includes the Gaspé, the Eastern Townships, the Mauricie, Montreal, South Shore, North Shore. Our we, our yes, is for everyone. We work with the Outaouais as well. The federal government is working with Quebec for healthcare, for dental care, for our seniors, for our families, for our children, for the environment, Mr. Speaker. When things are good for Quebec, things are bad for the Bloc Québécois. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby. Let's talk about real facts. The people in Montreal see horrible increases in rent, the highest in 30 years. Families simply cannot find an affordable roof over their heads. I would just like to ask members to relax so that the Speaker can hear the question, who is at the very far end of the House of Commons. I would like to ask the member for New Westminster Burnaby to start from the top. Montrealers have seen horrible rent increases, the highest in 30 years. Families simply cannot find an affordable roof over their heads. With the Liberals, rents have doubled. For every new housing unit built, 11 affordable ones have been lost. The Conservatives have lost 800,000 affordable housing units per housing unit built. So the crisis is because of the two of them. People need funds to protect them so that rent can remain affordable. The Liberals have to listen. It has to be in the budget. Will they place this in the budget, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Economic Development in Quebec. I would like to thank my colleague for his question, Mr. Speaker. He knows full well, as I do, that our government has done more for housing than any government before it. We've invested in cooperatives. We've invested in cooperative housing units in Montreal and in the Greater Montreal area. That is one of the best places where we've seen the best results, and we'll continue to strike agreements like we've done with Quebec. Elsewhere, we've just announced $1.9 billion for housing, for affordable housing throughout Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Vancouver East.
The median rent in Vancouver is now over $3,000. Finding a place in BC is a full-time job for renters as greedy landlords evict tenants to hike rent even higher. The Liberal government continues to let corporate landlords and greedy housing profiteers off the hook. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader would rather let his real estate executive buddies and developer friends maximize profits off the backs of Canadians. The NDP is proposing a fund to protect renters by keeping affordable homes available. Will the Liberals include this measure in Budget 2024 to make rent affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for the Development of Regional Areas of Quebec.
I want to thank my colleague for a question, and as she knows, before being a minister, I was PS for housing. I've worked with her on many issues of the housing front, and I know that she, like me, want to make sure that every Canadian has a home, and that's what we're doing as a government, doing accelerated fund, working on the rights of a home, working on homelessness to make sure that people have a roof over their heads, and we'll continue to make every day worthwhile for Canadians to have a home. Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians know that this Prime Minister and his carbon tax are not worth the cost. The average Ontario family pays $1,674 every year in Liberal carbon taxes. They get back $1,047. I know that it's very difficult for them to understand, but $1,674 is bigger than $1,047. And the tax goes up by 23% on April 1st. So if he won't spike the hike or axe the tax, then why won't he let the people decide and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives need to stop spreading falsehoods. The PBO has been very clear that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. It is true now. It will be true in 2030. The only thing that these folks are going to do by taking away the rebate is to make those on modest incomes poorer. Shame on you for that. While his climate plan is essentially to let the planet burn, the Conservatives essentially have a policy that is both reckless on the environment and reckless on affordability.
I'd like to remind all members, of course, to direct their comments through the chair. The honourable member from Thornhill.
Just because the minister repeats something over and over again, it doesn't make it true. That liberal math might make sense in fantasy land, but the math that Canadians are doing is painfully real as they try to put food on their table. And those Liberals have the audacity to believe that Canadians want to pay more in taxes, not less. The Conservatives are giving this government the chance to test that audacity and call a carbon tax election. If the Liberal government believes that everyone loves the carbon tax, then why won't they agree to go to the polls? What are they scared of?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I would say the Conservatives need to stop spouting falsehoods. Right. The average net benefit to Canadians in Ontario is $255 a year. In Manitoba, $365 a year. In Alberta, $723 a year. In Saskatchewan, $349 a year. What these folks are going to do is make poor people poorer, and they are going to essentially sacrifice the future of our children going forward. Shame on you!
The honourable member from Lakeland.
But no matter what the minister yells and flails about, it's clear that the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, because after 8 years, Canadians can hardly afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. Near Lakeland, the Cold Lake Food Bank said last year was their busiest ever. Quote, "We gave out over 6,000 hampers throughout the year. So far this year hasn't slowed down." 6,000, by the way, is 40% of the town's population. And 1 million more Canadians will be forced to go to food banks this year over last. But this Prime Minister, he plans to quadruple his carbon tax anyway. So when will the Prime Minister cancel his April cruel day, spike the hike and axe the tax?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will share with you what is cruel. What's cruel is that the Conservatives would cut the carbon rebate, which, Mr. Speaker, is a price on pollution. 8 out of 10 Albertans receive more money from the Canada carbon rebate than they pay at the end of the year. $700 more in the pockets of Albertans. What do Conservatives want to do? Cut. What will we do as Liberals? We will defend the planet. We will make sure there are good jobs, and we'll make sure that life is more affordable for Albertans and all Canadians.
The honourable member from Lakeland.
Except the Liberals' schemes and spin jobs can't cover up the cruel fact that the cost of everything is up, and so are emissions, because the carbon tax is a cash grab and not an environmental plan. But the Parliamentary Budget Officer, he tells the truth. Unlike them, like most Canadians, Albertans will pay almost $1,000 more this year than they get back in fake rebates. So today, Conservatives will vote non-confidence in the costly coalition to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. But will this Prime Minister finally listen to the majority of Canadians and premiers, spike the hike today, or call carbon tax election so Canadians can decide and axe it themselves?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, page 6 of the PBO report indicates that at the end of the year, Albertans are $700 better off thanks to a very real Canada carbon rebate. Mr. Speaker, in my riding of Edmonton Centre, well over 69% of residents want this government to fight climate change. We couldn't breathe the smoke in the air on September long weekend or May long weekend. These guys want to let the planet burn. We're going to defend the planet, put more money in the pockets of Albertans. They can do what they want to do. We're going to defend Canadians and make sure there's a planet for our kids and our grandkids.
Order. Order. The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
This is how desperate and pathetic this Liberal government is, and the ministers that repeat these talking points, they quote a 2-year-old PBO report. 2 years old. The PBO was just at committee 2 weeks ago and debunked everything they have to say because the carbon tax costs Canadians, and we know it. In Orangeville, my hometown, they are now predicting in a few years 5,000 to 6,000 residents will go to the food bank every month. In a town of 27,000 people, this is the Liberal carbon tax. Will they spike the hike, axe the tax, or call a carbon tax election?
The honourable government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this member talks about 2 years ago. Let us go back approximately 2 years in time when the citizens of Dufferin-Caledon saw on their doorsteps a Conservative candidate who was there solemnly promising to put a price on pollution, a price on carbon for the people of Dufferin-Caledon and the people all across Canada. Now this member wants to take the check that's going to be arriving on April 15th with the amount of $280 away from the citizens of Dufferin-Caledon. So he's renouncing his promise in the last campaign, and he's renouncing
the honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
He can't even defend what I said because he knows the report he's citing is 2 years old, it's out of date, and it's false. Now, here is Liberal math. The average person in Ontario, including Dufferin-Caledon, will pay $1,674 in carbon tax, and they will get a rebate, a fake rebate of $1,047. Even Liberals can do the math. That costs $674. That has consequences. After 8 years of this anti-Liberal Prime Minister, he's not worth the cost. So they can spike the hike, axe the tax, and call a carbon tax election.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Fact is simple, Mr. Speaker. The people in that member's riding and the people all across Ontario will be receiving a check for $280 on April 15th. These people want to vote against that. What they've also voted against in rural areas of the province of Ontario is a 20% top-up for rural residents in the province of Ontario. They want to take that money away, will disproportionately hurt the lower income people in their riding. This member needs to check his math and vote for the people that he represents.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. If the federal government wants to say no to full immigration powers for Quebec, it will have to say yes to actually doing its job then, especially with regards to asylum seekers. Families are stuck in inhumane situations. Some spend years worrying because the federal government is simply unable to process their application and they don't know whether they will have to leave Canada. Worse still, some are unable to meet their basic needs because they have no right to work, because they don't have a permit from the federal government. So instead of fueling squabbles, when will the minister finally get down to work and do his job? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. I know very well that the member across the way has closely followed the decisions we have made with regards to asylum seekers from Mexico. We've clearly said to Minister Fréchette that we will work with them in partnership. They don't like it when we work with Quebec. All they look is for squabbles with Quebec. We have a lot of work to do, but we will do it with Quebec. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Last Thursday, the Journal de Montréal reported police action in food bank queues. Food insecurity is causing chaos. Community organizations blame the explosion in the number of hungry people on the fact that asylum seekers have to wait 21 months before they can get a work permit. To quote one coordinator, they can't work for 2 years, but they still have families to feed. Recall that these permits are the sole responsibility of this minister. It's his jurisdiction, so instead of just incessant talk, when is he going to actually hand out permits? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. The member obviously isn't looking at the rest of Canada as well. In Toronto, we've accelerated permit grants. And that is what we did to Quebec. We would like to work with you to accelerate access to work permits. We can do more. We hear what people have to say. We can do better, of course. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquis-Longet. Quebec agriculture is nearing a precipice. We've been saying it for months. Environmental disasters, inflation, and high interest rates are pushing our farmers and producers towards bankruptcy. Their debt level has more than doubled since 2015. Last November, the Quebec government asked the federal government to activate the Agri-Recovery Program. 5 months later, radio silence. Still no emergency support from the federal government for farmers and producers in difficulty. Will the minister finally listen to farmers and producers' concerns, listen to Quebec and finally activate this program?
Agriculture and agri-food.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My honourable colleague's question, and being a farmer, I fully understand what devastation farmers go through with the environment. My honourable colleague is well aware what it's under a BRM program and it's agri-recovery. The application has been received and it's been assessed. We are continuing to work with the province of Quebec to make sure that the farmers in Quebec receive every remuneration possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
After 8 years, Canadian farmers are at their wits' end, and this Prime Minister's Liberal NDP carbon tax coalition aren't worth the cost. Instead of preparing for a new growing season, farmers are bracing themselves for another carbon tax increase on April 1st. The Agriculture Carbon Alliance surveyed 50 farms and found out they were paying more than $320,000 a month in carbon taxes. That's just 50 farms. There are almost 200,000 farms in Canada, and the punishment is going to get that much worse when the Prime Minister increases his carbon tax 23% on April 1st. Will the Prime Minister give farmers a voice and allow a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question. I believe he and I both canvassed the last election indicating we were going to put a price on pollution. We did put a price on pollution. We also put in place a Canada carbon rebate, which my honourable colleague is well aware, 8 out of 10 people in the country receive more than they pay. And in fact, in Alberta, they receive an average family receives $450 quarterly. The question is, why does my honourable colleague and the Conservative Party of Canada want to take $450 every quarterly out of the people's pockets?
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, I think the minister should talk to his own constituents in Prince Edward Island who are paying $1,600 a year in carbon taxes and getting about $1,000 back in the rebate, meaning it is costing islanders $600 a year in the carbon tax. And that has consequences. Higher carbon taxes are driving Canadians to food banks in unprecedented numbers. As a matter of fact, in his province, the corner food bank is struggling just to keep its doors open as demand for increase gone 70%. 5,500 families it's serving. Will the minister support a carbon tax election and give his islanders a voice?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
My constituents in Prince Edward Island are fully aware that I told them that we would put a price on pollution. And we also indicated we'd put the Canada carbon rebate in place. In fact, my constituents receive $220 every quarterly, and that money is in their pockets. What I cannot understand is why my honourable colleague wants to take that money out of their pockets. Farmers understand there's a problem with the environment. They also understand we have a program in place to address the environment. We have and will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is keeping the Prime Minister in power even though he has broken our immigration system, raised taxes and doubled our national debt. What good is the Bloc Québécois if it doesn't even do its job as opposition? They continually vote with the government to make Canadians poorer and radically increase the carbon tax. Canadians and Quebecers deserve better. What did the Prime Minister promise the Bloc Québécois in order to hold on to power? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. When it comes to promises, if I were the Conservative Party, I'd just be slightly ashamed of mentioning promises because they promised in 2021 the creation of a carbon tax system. The Conservative Party said they would implement standards on clean fuel. What are they doing? Well, they've just changed their minds. They change minds as much as they change underwear. They don't believe in climate change. They have no plan for the economy, no plan for jobs, no plans for affordability on this side of the House. We will work to fight against climate change, to fight to create jobs and to help Canadians when it comes to affordability.
The Honourable Member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, you know what's unfair? Canadians are doing everything right, but still struggling to keep up with costs. Meanwhile, big oil and gas CEOs are raking in billions while not paying their fair share. And it's because the Liberals refuse to stand up to their friends in oil and gas, while the lobbyists in the Conservative Party fight to get rich CEOs even more handouts. A windfall tax on the richest oil and gas corporations would bring in $4.2 billion to put back into Canadians' pockets. Why won't the Liberals do it?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is extremely important that all sectors of the economy pay their fair share. It is extremely important that all sectors of the economy make their contribution to the fight against climate change. We certainly are working very closely with the oil and gas sector, as we are with other sectors of the economy, to ensure very much that they do so. We need to see more progress moving forward. As I have been very clear, it is important that we see reductions in absolute emissions as we move forward, and I'm sure that we are going to see that, and we are certainly going to continue to push the sector to accomplish that.
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
Military civilian workers who support our troops on Canadian military bases are still on strike. They can't get a fair deal. And why? Because the employer is allowing scab workers to replace them. This is shameful. Liberals tell workers they're for anti-scab legislation, and then they look away when scabs are brought in to prevent base workers from fighting for better wages. The Liberals can't have it both ways. Will they stand up for striking civilian military workers, or will they keep turning a blind eye to these unfair labor practices?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
I want to thank the member for the important question. Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services is a trusted partner in the defence enterprise. They provide important services to our members. We've met with both parties and we are encouraging them to meet again at the bargaining table. CFMWS will continue to work with union representatives to reach agreements and to minimize impacts to CAF members. CAF members and their families are our top priority, and providing the supports that they require remains our priority. Thanks.
The honourable member from Waterloo.
Mr. Speaker, over the past few years, we have made considerable progress in modernizing the military justice system and advancing culture change to support victims and survivors in the Canadian Armed Forces. There remains a lot of work to do, primarily because of the inaction of the previous Conservative government. In her report, Justice Arbour recommends a transfer of all criminal code sexual offences to civilian jurisdiction. This approach would be suitable to constituents within the riding of Waterloo should it be done with the resources to ensure justice for the people involved. Will the Minister of National Defence update this House on the progress we are making to advance culture change?
Minister of National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Waterloo for her question, and I couldn't agree with her more. Creating meaningful and lasting cultural change for the Canadian Armed Forces is imperative. I'm pleased to share that this morning I had the opportunity to table Bill C-66, the Military Justice Modernization Act. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, will address 9 of the recommendations from Justice Arbour and Justice Fisher's reports. They will uphold our government's commitment to building a more inclusive, respectful, and professional Canadian Armed Forces. And Mr. Speaker, for every member of the Canadian Armed Forces, I want to advise that we have heard you. We have heard you clearly, and we will do whatever is required to provide you with a safe and inclusive workplace.
The honourable member from Chilliwack Hope.
After 8 years of the NDP Liberal Prime Minister, over 200,000 British Columbians are using the food bank every month. On April Fool's Day, BC NDP Premier David Eby will raise the carbon tax on the people of BC by 23%, as his friend the Prime Minister has made him do. This BC NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition will cost British Columbians billions at a time when they can least afford it. Since none of the 15 Liberal MPs from BC will stand up to spike the hike, will they at least call a carbon tax election so Canadians can vote to axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to stand up for British Columbians on this. British Columbians led the way with a price on pollution. It was Gordon Campbell, a right-wing premier in BC, who actually put in place the first price on pollution, led Canada, was a leader in the world. My goodness, it is a shame to see British Columbians like that who deny the reality of climate change. I agree very much with David Eby when he says we should stop listening to the baloney factory over there.
The Speaker would like to hear the question from the member from Chilliwack Hope and the response that will be offered in answer to that. The Honourable Member.
Well, Well, Mr. Speaker, after 15 years of that NDP Liberal plan, emissions are up and British Columbians continue to get poorer. The BC NDP budget says that $9 billion will be taken from British Columbians over the next 3 years. They'll only give $3 billion back in rebates, pocketing the extra $6 billion. This carbon tax coalition is making the most expensive place in the country more expensive to live by jacking up the price of gas, groceries, and home heating. So why don't they give Canadians a voice and allow us to vote to spike the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
The party is entitled to its opinion.
Order. I'm going to encourage members, especially the member from Kingston the Islands, please, to not have a conversation across the way. That also goes for members on this side and responding. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I say, the Conservative Party is certainly entitled to its own opinions, but it is not entitled to its own facts. Emissions are down. Canada is growing a clean growth economy for the future. I was in Germany earlier this week, and the German government told me that Canada is a model for the world in the fight against climate change and the work to address the issue that is an existential threat and to grow a clean economy. We signed an agreement on hydrogen that is going to create jobs and economic opportunity in Atlantic Canada because we believe in climate change. We are fighting climate change, and those climate deniers on the other side of the House should be ashamed of themselves.
The Honourable Member. Order. Order. The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
These Liberals think Canadians have never had it so good, but after 8 years, the NDP Liberals, Melody from Nova Scotia, is losing hope because the 23% increase in the carbon tax that's happening on April 1st will put the cost of everything up. Melanie had to sell her dream home because Liberals forced her to choose between food, heating, and having a mortgage. To help Melody, the Liberal leader in Nova Scotia has now joined in the fight against the carbon tax. So for the sake of Melody, if the Liberals won't axe the tax, will they at least spike the hike?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to say it again, but the Canadian carbon rebate puts more money in the hands of 8 or 10 Canadians every single day. What we haven't talked about today, Mr. Speaker, is the cost of not doing action on climate.
Here.
I know the member opposite, he was impacted by Hurricane Fiona. They've had fires, they've had drought, they've had floods. The conversation we all need to have in this House is what happens to our kids and our grandkids if we do not take action on climate change. We have a plan. I wish the Conservatives did.
The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
That answers cold comfort for the families in my community that have increased the usage of the St. Margaret's Bay Food Bank by 30%.
Right.
Why? Because the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that the average Nova Scotia family pays $1,500 in carbon tax and gets back $963 of their own money. That's less, since you can't add, that's $537 in more taxes than fake rebates. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. So if the Prime Minister won't spike the hike or axe the tax, will it at least let the people decide and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, again, the Canadian carbon rebate, the Canada carbon rebate is putting more money in pockets of Nova Scotians. And April the 4th, the average family outside of Halifax is going to get $989. You add to that what we're doing in $10 a day daycare, what we're doing in lowering taxes for everybody, what we're doing in so many things for people, especially the heat to oil to heat pump program, that is saving hundreds and hundreds of dollars every year for Canadians. We are there to help Canadians every day. I wish the Conservatives were.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, Supreme Court Justice Richard Wagner took the government to task on judicial appointments. He said the government's inertia with respect to vacancies and the absence of satisfactory explanations for the delays are disconcerting. Since then, the Liberals have been dragging their feet. Of the 85 vacancies to be filled, 68 remain. In February, the federal court ordered the government to get on with it. Instead, we learned on Monday that the Minister of Justice is challenging that decision in court. When will the minister get serious about the justice system and appoint the necessary judges? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. I'd like to congratulate all Canadian Ismailis who are celebrating Nowruz Mubarak today. To answer the question, what I'd like to say is that I have been working on this for 7 months, and I've already named 74 judges to the bench. The average for the Conservative government was only 60 a year. So I am making my efforts and working twice as fast as the Conservative government did, and I will keep doing so. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Twice as fast as zero is still zero. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Federal Court are both telling the government that the number of vacancies is preventing the justice system from working properly. The Chief Justice said access to justice and the health of our democratic institutions are at risk. He's not just anyone, and rather than speeding up appointments, the Minister of Justice is challenging the Federal Court's decision and looking for excuses for his inaction. Clogging up the courts with political and partisan cases is not the solution. We need more judges. What's the minister waiting for? More Liberal candidates? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. This is an important question, and what I'd like to tell all Canadians watching right now is that when there's a committee to recommend appointments, we never put a former Liberal on that advisory committee, which is not the case for the previous government. So we have taken steps to avoid partisanship, to appoint high-quality, diverse candidates, bilingual candidates, which is necessary for judges, not just in Quebec, but all across Canada. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague from Beauce didn't get an answer, so I'll try again. The Bloc is propping up this Prime Minister, even though he has broken our immigration system, raised taxes, and doubled our national debt. A vote for the Bloc will cost you, and it's going to cost even more on April 1st, because this Liberal Bloc government is going to raise taxes by 23%. It's not on. What did the Prime Minister promise the Bloc to keep his government in power? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers watching at home don't understand. This isn't the first time they haven't understood the Conservative Party. What the member just said doesn't apply in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. They're the party of inaction, Mr. Speaker. What Quebecers want is action on climate change, action on economic growth, action to boost green jobs. The Conservatives are voting for inaction. We are voting along with Quebecers to move Canada forward. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, my colleague just said, talked about not getting it. Let's talk about not getting it. I'm going to ask again. The food banks are overwhelmed. No one has ever seen the likes of it in this country. People who voted for the Bloc must be sorry. The Bloc has been supporting the Liberals and keeping them in power. I remind you, this Liberal Bloc government is going to impose an additional 23% tax on April 1st, and it's no April Fool's Day joke. A vote for the Bloc will sure cost you. Does this minority government will they reveal the secret deal they have with the Bloc Québécois? The Honourable Minister of Transport. That's not very nice for my colleague to give that kind of spanking to the Bloc. They've already got enough to deal with. The minister talked about inaction. What does inaction lead to? Forest fires. displaced people. And where was he when this happened in Quebec and all across Canada? They've been sitting on their hands, doing sweet nothing, while we've been getting down to work. I would always encourage members to be respectful. Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, food bank usage in Edson is up nearly 300%. Now on April 1st, these Liberals want to raise the carbon tax another 23%, making groceries, gas, and heating more expensive for Canadians. They are on track to quadruple the carbon tax. The average family in Alberta will pay nearly $3,000 of carbon tax this year. Will the Liberals finally allow a carbon tax election so Albertans can decide to axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Member of Parliament for Yellowhead is simply wrong. Albertans in rural Alberta, with the doubling of the rural top-up, will receive $2,160 in rebate in the upcoming year. More money, $700 more, $960 more if you're in rural or remote Alberta, Mr. Speaker. I have one message for Albertans and for Canadians. Stop the Conservatives and don't let them ruin the rebate.
The Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Louis. Mr. Speaker, tourism brings economic growth to communities across the country. In 2022, tourism supported 1.9 million jobs in Canada. No other industry has an economic impact that affects every region of the country. The federal tourism strategy, the tourism growth strategy, recognizes the opportunities involved in attracting more international events, such as conferences and conventions. Can the Minister of Tourism tell us how the government is seizing the opportunity of business tourism? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Lac Saint Louis. He and I and this government believe that Canada is a destination of choice for international business events. So there will be a $50 million investment in bringing more than $170 million into the Canadian economy while creating good jobs in places like Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and Vancouver, as well as in the regions. So that'll bring over $170 million into the Canadian economy, and I sure hope the Conservatives will support this.
Calgary, Midnapore.
After 8 years, scandal runs rampant in the Liberal NDP government. We all know about ArriveCan, and now we know about another $5 million in fraudulent billing. To make matters worse, the billing is across 36 departments and dates back to 2018, pre-pandemic. This is only the first wave of even more fraudulent billing cases. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. So can the Minister answer one simple question? How many millions of dollars in fraudulent billing did ArriveScam cost Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member said or didn't say, fraudulent billing is totally unacceptable, and that's why it was so important yesterday to release the information that thanks to better data since pandemic, thanks to better ability to analyze and use those data, we're now able to proceed much more quickly and much more efficiently towards identifying and prosecuting cases of fraudulent overbilling in Canada in 2024.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, reading the newspaper on Tuesday morning, I came across some disturbing news. Apparently, the member for Brossard-Saint-Lambert, an Assistant Deputy Speaker of the House, invited to a partisan cocktail party on February 20th the director of two organizations accused of hosting illegal Beijing-controlled police stations in Brossard and Montreal. What's worse, the Ministry of Industry was the guest of honor. Does the Prime Minister support his members defending these organizations, which are under investigation for hosting Beijing-controlled police stations? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, as my colleague knows full well, our government is dealing with the issue of foreign interference in a very effective and strong manner. The RCMP has confirmed that the specific questions that my colleague raised are under police investigation, and that is the appropriate way of addressing the issue. Obviously, we won't comment files that are currently being investigated by the police. It's important that everyone exercise some restraint in this area as well.
St. James, Senator Boya Headingley.
Here. Iran shot down flight PS 752, killing 55 Canadians and 30 permanent residents. Yet today, 700 IRGC terrorists still operate on Canadian soil, terrorizing Persian and Jewish communities.
Terrible.
5 years after Parliament voted to ban the IRGC, the Prime Minister seems more concerned with punishing our democratic ally Israel and rewarding Hamas terrorists than going after the IRGC in Canada. When will the Prime Minister finally stick up for Canadians and ban the IRGC?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we have said for many years now that Iran is one of the most important state sponsors of terrorist activity around the world. Mr. Speaker, our government has put in place a series of very robust sanctions, used immigration legislation to bar many of these people from visiting Canada. The Security Intelligence Service, the Border Services Agency are obviously taking their responsibilities very seriously. Mr. Speaker, our government continues to rely on the advice from security services with respect to listing terrorist entities.
The Honourable Member from Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, for far too long, Indigenous stories have been told by others, often inaccurately and insensitively. As we continue our path to reconciliation, we must ensure that Indigenous voices are empowered to share their own stories, and Indigenous cultures and languages are preserved and celebrated. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage provide an update on the work of the Indigenous Screen Office and the unique role it plays in the promotion of Indigenous artists and producers?
The Honourable Minister for Patrimoine Canadien.
I thank my colleague for his question and advocacy. We all have a role to play to advance reconciliation, and this includes cultural reconciliation. Since we supported its creation in 2017, the Indigenous Screen Office has played a pivotal role in revitalizing Indigenous cultures and bringing Indigenous stories to our screens. Last week, I was proud to announce that we made this funding permanent, providing it with $65 million over 5 years and $13 million ongoing. This funding will support and promote the work of Indigenous creators to share their rich and diverse cultures and languages for years to come.
The Honourable Member from Esquimalt, Saanich-Sioux.
Mr. Speaker, there's panic amongst community-based health prevention groups who are working to limit the spread of HIV in Canada. On March 31st, the Liberals are letting funding for HIV self-testing kits run out. Self-test kits have quickly become a vital tool in limiting new infections and moving toward the eradication of HIV/AIDS. We know community-based distribution of test kits works. Frontline workers were hoping to see the funding double rather than end. Will the Minister today commit to providing the funding needed to help eliminate HIV?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I want to thank the member opposite for the question and his advocacy on eradicating HIV/AIDS from our communities. And we know that a lot of work has been done to find solutions and to provide care for HIV/AIDS, and our government remains committed to supporting all those endeavors, and the best way to do it is by working with communities. We'll continue to support them. I look forward to continue working with the member so that support is always available for people living with HIV and AIDS. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, the so-called climate debate taking place in this place is the worst of all worlds. It's unserious and profoundly unfunny. It is a grotesque display of ignorance of the science and rejection of the solutions that are desperately needed. Our children and grandchildren will not forgive us for this display, but we still have a chance. Will this government commit that when we come back after Easter, we convene as a committee of the whole, bring scientific experts to this place to educate all members, take questions, and focus on facts?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House believe in science, believe in science-based policy, believe in ensuring that scientific reality of climate change is something that is acknowledged and incorporated into all of the work that we are doing, whether it is on the environment or on the economy. It is certainly something that we share and agree on with the member from Saanich Gulf Islands, and certainly we are interested in finding many, many ways to educate those in this House that continue to deny the reality of climate change.
Question period has now come to an end, and we turn to the regular Thursday question from